Good morning, everyone. This is April the 14th, 2019, and we congratulate you all for coming to our Genie seminar where we can share our co-creative genius, learn together to solve the important issues and puzzles that face us in today's very complex world. We've gone through a number of programs where we've introduced some very critical words. There's someone who's not muted here. That there's in the background. If you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself, it would help. I'm gonna. Let's see. We're still getting noise in the background. Okay, so just unmute yourself. You know how to do that if you're ready to speak. We've gone through some important word switches, word changes that enable us to move from a way of thinking that we innately acquire to what we think of as elevating the capital of our intentions from a fairly robotic animal brain to our puzzle-solving, wish-granting genie organ, or what we've said is our cerebral cortex. 7 simple word changes that do that, including one sentence, which we think could change everything. The one sentence, the meme, being what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future. That being so powerful because it simply asks, how can we work together to create a positive outcome? There's no one to be blamed. There's no right or wrong. It's simply a creative solution. And that's the one meme that would replace or at least add to the dominant meme in today's culture, which is what's good for me, my family, and my tribe for here and now. The meme that essentially said there's the good way, the right way, the best way, and if you're not belonging to our tribe and our way, then you're probably in the wrong path and usually deserve some form of hurt or punishment. That's been hopeful. That's what we understand, probably the reason why our history is defined by its series of wars. So I was going to discuss today a little bit about an event that occurred several days ago. One of my mentors, Barbara Marks Hubbard, actually had a situation. She fell, she apparently skinned her knee, she developed a bit of an abscess, and was admitted to the hospital where it was to be drained. And it seemed like a very simple procedure, but apparently something happened afterwards. She actually conducted one of her seminars while she was in the hospital just before it was drained, and then the next day she went into a coma, went into the operating room, and never woke up. And the question is, maybe your expertise, Pacey, whether this might be related to catching one of those virulent germs that we sometimes hear about in hospitals when people go into a hospital and they demise not from the original problem, but because of some complication. But she was obviously in very good health, traveling around the world, and quite alert. And then when she, within a day or two after being in the hospital, she went into this situation where she was admitted to the operating room and did not wake up. Well, the importance to thousands of people, she was mentor to thousands of people, including myself. And what was significant about her is that she's sort of the mother of evolution. She really had written a number of books that describe the importance of our new story, as she called it. That we have a new story that says that we are not 6,000 years old, as the Bible tells us, that we're billions of years old, as more like Darwin has has discovered just a mere 150 years ago. After 3.5 billion years, we've had various kinds of ways of looking at the world, but it's like in the blink of an eye, just 150 years ago, that the idea that we're really not human beings, that is static, high-level animals, but we are humane becomings, that we are a creature in progress of evolving from a very simple organism to a more complex organism, from going from one cell to various kind of forms of other species, to develop procreation, to multiply by mitosis, and then to spin off some variations of our identical self, to go from egotistical love or directing our energy towards our identical self to our offspring or our family. And then the family began to develop families of families, and they became tribes, and we went from family love to tribal love. So then we became involved with various tribes competing with one another for scarce resources. We didn't have supermarkets or places that you can just go out and there wasn't a lot of cultivated vegetables and fruit and so on. So it was mainly competing for limited animals and resources. And then we divided the sexes into two. So we divided the bisexual organism that could produce by itself to a masculine energy species and feminine, not a species, but a feminine energy gender and a masculine energy gender. And the masculine side was given large muscles, bigger weight, and the ability to create millions of seed every day and spread them. And the feminine gender was given the innate, seeming the qualities to bear the fruit, to receive the seed, and to nourish that seed to reproductive maturity. So basically, the masculine and feminine were, for the most part, very much identical. Same number of arms, legs, heart, lungs, all parts of ourselves, but there were certain limited areas where we were clearly distinct and different. So that has, I have to turn that off if you'll excuse me. Should have done that earlier. So we've evolved over a period of time, and that essentially was Barbara Marx's contribution, that we are humane becomings. We're in the process of evolving. We're continually changing. We see that in the life cycle, for example. We see the difference between an infant when they're born, as we go through the different stages of development until we get to maturity, and then we become older. We become to deteriorate in some ways, and then of course we die and we make way for the next generation. So Barbara introduced some new words, actually, that I think are kind of interesting. She picked up on the idea that nature, and if you want to think of nature as God or the first cause or whatever, she had the idea that our early cause or creator had the impulse of creativity. That the most important thing was that we create in large numbers, we reproduce ourselves, and we know that simple organisms make maybe 500 generations in a lifetime. And if those 500 generations create 500 generations, you can see how rapidly that would spread. And so she indicated that much of our activity was to reproduce the life cycle, and it was related to our genitals, actually. It's what's between our hips. And she introduced the word suprasex, not super sex, but suprasex, sex above the waist, that we've gradually migrated to where our head, our brain, becomes more important. So we're not just creative by creating life, but we go up to our brain where we create ideas. And that the new idea is that we are able to become involved in suprasexuality if we teach ourselves certain ideas. And she also had the idea that instead of competing with one another, the idea that we would have a capitalistic democracy, capitalism being described somewhat like monopoly, a win-lose, zero-sum kind of a game, where as in monopoly, there are winners, and usually there's one winner, and then the rest of the players are losers. That at the end game, one has most of the wealth, the physical wealth, and the others really are out of money, basically. All your properties have been owned by someone else, your money has been owned by someone else. But of course, it's just a game, but it sort of describes what is capitalistic democracy. And democracy has been defined as government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And most of our brilliant ancestors, many of us subscribe to the idea of bottom-up government, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But Barbara introduced another word, which I think was important, which was synergistic democracy. So that instead of a capitalistic democracy where we compete with one another for material goods, money, and so on, we introduced this new word, synergistic democracy, which is when we learn to work together and we use our creative energy for our mutual benefit. Synergistic democracy is where we have a win-win outcome, where everybody wins, where we can create all the things that everyone needs. And I've said, and some people I know disagree, that if we would limit our population that we could take care of on our planet Earth, and we have the ability to produce enough food, we would have a much happier situation, because the history of wars and the many that are going on today and through history that have defined our history usually involve some conflict between the haves and the have-nots. And we know that war has been the driver of evolution. Whoever develops the greater, with their knowledge, whoever develops the greater power, the greater strength, the better technology usually wins the war, and that technology then, and their new values of the winning group takes over. So that's essentially what happens. So that's the message, essentially, that we're not just static animals, we're humane becomings. And in tribute to Barbara, who has been the pioneer of this, she's basically said, we are ever changing, and it's our opportunity, our responsibility to use our imagination to be creative. And that's, we've talked about this in the past. It's our ability to use words, such as the 7 word switches and the love creation skills, and the words we've talked about, the mental freedom control panel that talk about our choices when we use our willpower, that we have the ability to use words to create imagination, to become creative. And in being creative, we have the ability to tell accurate stories. And if we tell accurate stories, then we can predict the future. If we have an understanding of our past, we can predict that what we need to do in the future. If we tell inaccurate stories, as they say, garbage in, garbage out, then the stories we've been telling ourselves are what others have called limiting beliefs that get us into trouble, such as my way is the only right way, and some of the other ideas we've had. So that's what I introduced for today, and we can maybe share your thoughts about some of this. If you have some, maybe you can disagree with that. I mean, you might still have the idea, the more prevalent idea, that we were created 6,000 years ago. The Bible is pretty much correct. We talked in the past about religion and our belief system. I might just comment that a while back I was giving a talk at Central Connecticut College on peace at their peace program that 2 professors run, and the topic of religion did come up, and we said that there are several different religions, and the professor said, the professor of philosophy said, well, there are 20,000 religions in the world. And my comment was, if there are 7 billion people in the world, there are 7 billion religions. That for every individual, we have an assumptive worldview that we believe in, and we're willing to act on that view, and that assumptive worldview, whether it's true or not, is the belief system that we personally have. So for every person, we have an individual religion. Of course, we have those we can identify as conservative and so on, uh, uh, fundamentalist or liberal or conservative and so on. So we have, even within the titles, we have variations, but we certainly have many different titles. But basically, we have, from my perspective, a different religion for every individual, because we operate not on with the events in our life, but on the views we make of them. And it's our views that usually get us into trouble. So I'm going to stop here and pass the talking stick around. And then we would like to allow a little bit of time for this wonderful opportunity we've had from Zoom to initiate some Genie seminars that might start a movement around the world. That's one of the hopes, my hope, and I think it's one that you share, that we can share this new process of education, Genie seminars, so it can become popular around the world. So the talking stick is available. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about Barbara Mark's idea of evolution and who we are. Who are we, and what is our purpose in being here?
I think if I had that answer, I'd make a lot of money.
Might not do you any good, Josephine, that's because we're thinking spiritual values may be more important than being a billionaire.
Well, they just did a recent study, it's all over the news recently, that atheism now beat out as the number one. People select a religion, if you will. Atheism is the number one. It beat out all other religions. So I found that interesting.
It's surpassing the religion of greed, of money.
Well, it surpassed the religion of Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism.
But that is the formal idea of religion. But some people say that the biggest religion we have is the pursuit of money. We can disagree with that, of course.
No, it's a philosophical discussion. Yeah, I don't disagree. That's just not on one of the forms when you check religion. Greed isn't on there.
Is that the absence of religion?
Yeah, that's the atheism.
Yeah, but can you call atheism a religion?
Well, I don't think they have it's kind of, and I didn't see the survey, but it's kind of, do you not ascribe to any of the above, right? So it could be agnosticism or it could be atheism. They just are not identifying with the most popular religions of the past.
Strikes me as just an absence of religion. It strikes me as what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, let's consider religion the moral teaching of mankind. That's what I learned in college anyway. Religion is the moral teaching of mankind. And we can think of as capitalism, or the acquisition of material wealth, as sort of a religion. People spend a lot of their time trying to devote their time to grow their capital. So maybe capitalism is not necessarily a moral situation. It's simply a matter of getting more money. And with more money, you can do all kinds of things. But it may not be as involved with morality. And welcome, Katie.
Well, in ancient times, capitalism and the pursuit of money seems to be what brought down the temples. Seems to be antithetical to religion.
I'm gonna stand up for Adam Smith and capitalism. So I think you're talking about moral dimensions on how people behave amongst each other. I don't, capitalism itself is a mechanism. I took an economics course in college, and basically it boiled down to economics answers 4 questions. It answers, what do we produce? How do we produce it? who gets the goodies that get produced, and how do you invest? And the idea of how do you distribute wealth was one of those issues, how do you produce wealth? Capitalism is, there's mechanisms how you answer those questions. Capitalism has been an incredibly potent form of creating value or creating things that people could consume. And, the basic Adam Smith model is that, if contrasted with a command economy, which somebody says, well, we know what everybody needs and we're going to decide who makes what. We'll just tell, the boss or the czar will tell everybody what to do. Capitalism says that, well, we're going to go ahead and, how do we figure out what to make? We're going to make what people want. And how do we distribute the wealth is, well, we're going to confer some of the value created by people to those who create the wealth. And that turns out to be very potent. It doesn't really address the idea of somebody's got all of the stuff and somebody doesn't get any. I think of Bill Gates as an example. Bill Gates is a very wealthy man, but, he's wealthy not because he's taken money from everybody who has a computer in the world. He's built up his wealth by saying, rather than having to pay a secretary and having to go out and buy a typewriter, you can spend a little bit of your time and you can get a computer in your house, and what used to take you 3 days now takes you half a day. So in exchange for coming up with something that really did benefit everybody, he's made himself very wealthy. But he didn't do it by doing things. Yeah, except for there's going to be those who are going to be the misfallen. But overall, from a societal perspective, he's tried to do something. He's done something that's, allowed people to spend less time getting what they need to get done. And he's taken a percentage of that savings and accumulated wealth from it. So, that view of technology and capitalism, is one where, it's a system that's helped people who have a good idea to make life better for other people. It gives them a way of doing it and incentive to do it. It can go black. You can go that, that Microsoft can say that, well, we've got this better mousetrap and we're allowing a way for everybody to benefit from it. We're going to draw a percentage of that benefit. If it transitions from, hey, I'm doing things that are improving to the other predatory voices, well, now that I'm so powerful, I'm going to kill anybody who tries to challenge my monopoly or, my thing. Then it sort of moves from doing good to doing evil. When companies get so big, rather than creating greater value, they kill the competition. That's the kind of the model that I think my dad's referring to. That, there's a zero-sum game, and I'm going to just pick up all the cards on the table by eliminating anybody who can challenge me. But that model is the capitalism piece of it, isn't the moral piece of it. The moral piece is that if you're doing things that are creating goodness for others and value, that's good. If you're doing things that starve other people and cheat them, that's bad. But I'm not sure that's capitalism that is the issue. Capitalism is just a way of organizing economic affairs, organizing the way societies do things. So I think, synergistic capitalism, which I think is one of the things my dad was referring to, is kind of like the early Microsoft model. Is somebody's coming up with an idea and he's producing good for other people. Where, the other form of predatory or zero-sum game, that same company can, rather than selling their product through innovation, they sell it by killing their competitors in the negative form. So anyways, democracy is not a matter of beating up on capitalism. I think it's a matter of, how do you apply some of these very effective principles, that have created more wealth for folks, than they've had in the last, I think the wealth created in the last 100 years is more than everything that's been created up to the previous, up to all time, up to the last 100 years. There's arguments that it does degenerate into zero-sum game, and then the people who are winning, just continue to win. But those, I think, become more moral issues, and they become capitalistic issues. So anyways, I guess my point is I want to separate the capitalism from, moral issues. I think capitalism is still good. if you just synergistic, another word for it might be socialism or communism. And, those systems haven't really worked all that well either. I yield back the talking stick.
I think
Hey, and Josephine, take that.
I'm just waiting my turn. Marilyn, you were going to say something.
I just think that most of these systems that start out very idealistically and really very good. Communism, the concept of communism is wonderful, except it doesn't seem to work. And I know in Israel they started with kibbutzes, where it was really a communist setup, but it's kind of developed into a capitalism. It doesn't seem to keep working, and capitalism starts out well and then sort of deteriorates where it doesn't seem to work. So it's like you have to keep producing new iterations of either the same thing or something different. And I guess there isn't one answer or one solution. It's sort of a process. Okay.
It's almost what I was going to say, Marilyn. I think a lot of these isms start out really well, no matter what the ism is. And this could be in religion or politics. They have the grandiose ideas, and then it gets into the hands of the individuals, and it becomes corrupt, no matter what ism you're gonna talk about. I think, but the ideals at their core, any one of them could work if we use them for, as described, as prescribed. Let me say that. If we use it as prescribed, they're probably really great, but we don't. So then capitalism turns into greed. Communism turns into oppression, and every other ism has its downfall and its drawbacks because of you forget that it goes back to the individual and how they are applying it, and they're not thinking, they forget the others. That's how I feel.
I think I'm in the unusual position of agreeing with both Abby and Josephine. I think maybe translated into your words, Dad, I think these the isms that Josephine describes are all childs of the new brain and our Genie organ, and our behavior and how we implement all of these things are really enacted by our old brain. And what's common to all these isms is that they're all applied to the old brain. You can have great ideas, and as long as you keep painting it on top of an old do or die aggressive, however we characterize our old brain, whatever isms we paint on top of that, we come up with the same outcome. And I think it lends truth to, we need to change the way we think and the way we behave. But I don't think I agree with Abby, it's not capitalism itself. That's a model that describes something. We're the practitioners of any of these things, and we tend to screw it up. Or it certainly diverged from the ideal that gave birth to these various models.
Well, the concepts and the doctrines and the intellectual ideas behind them and the ideologies clinically applied are fine. It isn't until we add humanity to them that they go up the spout. Therein lies the problem.
I'm thinking, what the mitigating fact of American history, where there was the robber barons, where, there was capitalism, but all of the wealth was concentrated in a very small set of folks. And, it was because it was a democracy, and, you could, while there was corruption amongst the small group of families, the Rothschilds and the Taste, and the folks in the railroad times in the 1800s who owned all the railroad lines and bought it up and then choked off everybody else. What is it that counteracted that? Was it that obviously had great political influence, but with so many people in a democracy, was it the unions that were able to form, or was it that enough people could vote and sort of vote, even with the corruption by a relatively small number of people, there was some counterbalancing that let other people's views come through. So it wasn't just the very few controlling so many. And, you know, that form of democracy did allow some readjustment to occur, you know, short of revolution. I think that you know, the moral argument on what do you do, I'm one of the issues with production systems is, you know, you can kind of say, hey, I'm going to start up this capitalistic system. And, you know, a lot of moral people do good things, and the majority of people do things, but it just takes really one person to say that, you know, I'm willing to screw my brother and step on somebody's head to get ahead. And that person, they excel and they sort of float to the top and absorb, you know, a lot of the wealth. And, you know, once that behavior is seen to be successful, others start to model it, and then, you know, the system roughly corrupts. I used to think of, you know, the idea of China. Would China, you know, ever become a, you know, a pleasant place for democracy? And in my mind, it kind of boiled down to the autocrats, the people running China. There's a choice, you know, if you had a choice between what was doing best for all the people in civil service that you were supposed to be serving and what was best for your family, which would you choose? And, you know, my thinking was, in general, human nature, at least in China, was they choose to do what's best for their family, not necessarily what's best for the group. And that element of human nature is hard to overcome. You know, at the elemental level, I've got a choice. Am I going to do something that's better for my family versus what's better for the masses? You know, what do people do? I think Don's promoting as well, you know, that meme where you look for others is really better for you.
The only thing I would say is, you know, and I think I've said this before, is if this is going to be successful, somehow it has to not ignore the older brain. It has to figure out how to work with the older brain, or it's not going to be successful. And I think that's the nut that I've been trying to crack in my mind. Like, how do you satisfy both?
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that kind of is, you know, you can talk to people about depression or about when everything is about me. Does that lead to local happiness? You know, that's an angle that sells.
When you make everything about yourself, I think you're fooling yourself. It's a canard, because I don't think anybody down the road ever is truly satisfied doing that. They don't even realize they're not, that is pursuing something ultimately unsatisfactory, because it's never enough.
You have to learn to redefine what happiness is, what satisfaction is. And I think some people do that. You know, Bill Gates turned from making all the money in the world to giving away more money in the world. Maybe some iteration of that is what people have to learn to do.
Or, you know, another way to word it is, if you can convince people that it's more satisfying to do that than it is just to think about yourself. You know, it gives you a higher level of personal contentment to be generous than it is to be greedy. And
I think the result of doing that is more concrete and less abstract. It becomes more tangible than just because someone said a moment ago, I think Marilyn said the definition of happiness, and I find that to be a very quicksilver thing. I think it changes throughout the course of your life, what you consider happiness to be. I think that incrementally it changes. I know that I don't define it the way I did even 10, 20, 25 years ago. It certainly has changed for me.
I think the happiness might be one of the both and examples, is that I guess, and part of me that I've worked on, I'm getting more comfortable with is, the notion of enough, in many ways is a state of mind. It's not a measured amount. And if you appreciate that, I think that's a new brain issue. If you appreciate that, then you realize you have control over your perception of whether you have enough. It's not always a matter of pursuing more. But I also think the more we talk about, doing for others and being satisfied, it takes away from the reality people talk about, we stand on the shoulders of giants. The biggest giant we stand on is the old brain. That's what got us here. And I think the further we move away from satisfying the old brain, the squishier this gets. And I think that there is something about tangibly having enough. And I think until many of the inequities where many people do not have enough, just practically, tangibly, and survivably don't have enough, I think we may be deluding ourselves that we're going to talk everyone into subscribing to this new brain thing. The old brain is very practical. It's very tangible. And I think, one of the reasons there's so much conflict is because, the old brains are acting in the way that's survived it, that's worked for it. And we, in some ways, we as the haves, play a role in propagating that. I've thought more than once, how much good would it do for me, to give all of my wealth away? I consider myself, I've worked hard, but I consider myself pretty wealthy. And to some degree, I have some feelings of being a hypocrite, of, thinking about all this wonderfulness and adequacy for the world, when I know I have more than 99% of people in the world. And it seems like kind of academic, and or moral masturbation to think of what everyone else should do to be happy. I have all the cookies.
But if you give all your wealth away, then ultimately you become a burden to someone else, and they have to pick up your slack. Not good.
I don't think giving away your wealth is the answer. I think sharing your wisdom might be. So this is the marketer in me talking. You don't have to change everybody. You have to figure out what the target audience is, right? You have to, any movements don't start with changing everyone. It starts with changing a few, right? And then it picks up, if you're fortunate, it picks up success in that other people want to mimic the ideas and share the ideas and spread the ideas. So you're looking to have people give all their wealth away. That's not what this is about. This is about people who are like-minded, that want others to listen to the message. And I think if we start there, doesn't matter what level you are on the economic spectrum. It's if you want to change your mind to help make this world better. And you start mimicking the behaviors to do that. Because Lord knows I am not looking to give away all my wealth. I'm not. I have children, hopefully soon grandchildren. So, that's the reality. But I do want to have them live in a better world. And I want to do something positive so that they may live in a better world.
One of the major resources of the self-help gurus, Jack Canfield and many other people, go back to a book that was written years ago by a man by the name of Napoleon Hill. And the title of his book was Think and Grow Rich. Think and Grow Rich. If you read something about his life and his disciple, who was William Clement Stone, and that was Jack Canfield's mentor, William Clement Stone. He was one of the richest men in the world. He funded one of our presidents, and helped fund the Crystal Cathedral. You remember that group? One of the fundamental ideas, if you understand the life of both William Clement Stone and Napoleon Hill, was the title of the book should have been Think and Grow Wisdom. They were really interested in what they said is following the laws of God and doing what makes people, works for all people. You know, William Clement Stone, if you read something of his life, he said he hoped to influence the world. But instead of saying think and grow wisdom, which may not have sold many books, he titled his book Think and Grow Wealth. And of course, people are more interested, it seems, because of our animal brain, which interprets the world physically, not in terms of conceptually. We said our animal brain does not have language, it doesn't have words. So we think in terms of either or, and money today and physical wealth is a source of power. You know, it used to be that muscles were the important thing, strong teeth, strong muscles. Today, because we've transferred our world to one of physicality, to one where mental ideas, for example, money is the symbol of muscles. Money is a symbol of physical power. With money, you can buy many things. You can buy servants. You can buy sex. You can buy. Question whether you can buy happiness. It's a question whether you can buy wisdom. Wisdom, you know, is a little different kind of a thing. Wisdom is something you can't develop muscle, no matter how much money you have. You can't develop muscles by sending somebody else to the gym to do exercise for you. That's an important concept to think about. You have to go to the gym, you have to do it yourself. So if you're going to learn wisdom, if you're going to learn the conceptual skills that have to do with happiness, love, we said the 4 skills that we think are so critical are happiness, enough, love, and peace. These 4 skills, you have to do it by exercising our mind, not by collecting money. I was, you know, the person who's been coordinating many of the seminars for Barbara Marx Hubbard is a very interesting guy. He's a minister, trained as a minister, and he's very interested in conscious evolution and making the world a better place, all the good things that we think of that we'd like to think of ourselves. But he said he did his training at Rush Hospital in Chicago, and a lot of his job was going and talking, you know, giving the final talks to dying people. He said what was interesting to him was that what most people were interested in talking about when they were faced with their demise or the possibility of their last area was not money. It was their family. It was the people that were important to them. It was their relationships. It had to do with more the conceptual idea that had to do with the people they loved and the people that loved them, not physical money. But I go back to the idea that maybe the problem is, it doesn't matter what ism we have, as long as we continue to think in the way that we've inherited over 3.5 billion years, and that way was effective. We think that what we inherited was a museum of all the things that worked in the past, a collection of all the positive behaviors. But as the world changes, and now we're not killing one another or going with fists and sticks and stones that allow everybody people to survive, and this was Einstein's message, because we're confronted with not a win-lose situation anymore, when 9 tribes have weapons that are all lose-lose, that the next war will be over in 10 minutes. And we're not in an era that's win-lose anymore. The world has changed dramatically, and we have this addiction to a way of thinking, either or, and we're not aware of it. And the way we become aware of it is by exercising our mind in these kinds of meetings where we share our genius. So no matter what ism we have, democracy, communism, socialism, all of these could work if we really believed in synergistic relationships. If we asked ourselves, and this was the wisdom or the brilliance of Barbara Marx Hubbard that I started this meeting with. Her basic issue is that people ask, what is it that I have to contribute to make the whole system better? What is it that I have? What is my basic heart's desire? What is within me and my innately within me that I have, whether it's being a cook or a scientist or an engineer or a truck driver or a creator of religion? What is it that I have that synergistically adds to the benefit of the whole world? And as long as instead we're caught with this idea, which we've inherit, what's good for my tribe, then no matter what ism we have, the way we think is going to take it to the ground, and it's only a matter of time, as Einstein told us, before we use our physical prowess, that is, our muscle, money, and our creativity of physical strength like bombs. So that's the issue. So that's the issue there. And I think Katie is saying, let's honor the circle. So I've yielded the talking stick.
Well, and really, Don, all I was saying is you were speaking about the different kinds of governments. I thought, you know, as you were talking about when we can all contribute what our asset is, you're describing Ubuntu. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Ubuntu. Michael Tellinger is kind of the father of it's an ancient African religion, if you will, or way of life that sharing is taught. This synergistic democracy is really taught. And children will share their food with others before they take it for themselves in experiments they've done. Actually, as Avi was speaking about the railroad barons of the 1800s, it reminded me of this. The Museum of Our Mind is really missing the story of the great peacemaker and how he walked on this continent. You know, before Europeans brought their, because as Josephine identifies, everything starts out with a great idea and, you know, altruism, and somehow greed kind of undermines it over time, it seems like. And I was just, so I just happened to have this crazy horse quote there that says, we do not want riches, we seek peace and love. And I think about how, you know, 500 years ago, this is a moneyless, prisonless, egalitarian society. And when I've looked into the museums that we have, when I look at the words of Chief Joseph, Chief Seattle, Red Jacket, Yellow Jacket, Blue Jacket, all of them, they all had a lot of wisdom. And we were not, and I think the worldview of it, I know the Lakota is really based on mutual respect for all life. And the money is, you know, spirituality and your respect and and like with the story of the great peacemaker, which our country is built on, the Grand Council, you know, you were first a self-made man and then became a leader in your community before you were even considered to be a leader for the greater impact. And I don't know. The conversation started with Barbara, and I know that it was because of an evolutionary metamorphosis class that I took with Barbara back in 2009 that I became associated with a lot of different people. But the interesting thing to me here on my full circle move is I had found Don and loved what he said. And it was that very question that I went to Don when he said, why don't you jump on the call? Because I wrote to Don and I said, Don, you know, where should a fellow invest his money to find more peace in this world? And, you know, that's says, why don't you kind of jump on the call? And, you know, I'm still always wondering, you know, where do I focus my energy, my action, my assets to see more peace in the world? And then, you know, over time you come to realize that I can't tell anybody anything. we all come to everything of our own volition. You know, I can't change the heart of anyone else. I can only tell you what's going on in mine and change mine. And I know that Barbara Marx Hubbard really had a lot of, and the other thing that's interesting to me in this conversation is, I know when I first was introduced to her, one of the first books I read was called The Hunger of Eve. And it strikes me how Barbara was really quite driven by religious things that had happened to her and revelations in her life that really drove her to see beyond these walls of the different religions. Anyway, those are just some of my thoughts that I'm coming up with here. And I think you know, we do not want riches, we want peace and love kind of describes our group too. And that's my offering this morning. I'll return to talking to other. Thank you for listening.
I'm going to give an angle. I think that was something that Pacey said, that you know, the meme here is what's good for, you know, we have to change or we're going to blow ourselves up. The challenge is that still 90% of the old meme is still effective. It's only this small piece of the meme about nuclear war and some of that thing that has really changed. So, you know, as I move through my career and life and feeding my family and whatnot, that old meme is still in force. And I guess it's worth being informed by, or at least recognizing that, you know, it's not that the old meme should be completely tossed out. It's basically the old meme basically is still workable, or, you know, still is this, you know, the way of maybe getting by through the most of your life. It's just that this small end of the, you know, when you bring in nuclear war and conflict, that it starts to announce itself as something that's not survivable. So just, you know, just be careful about throwing away the baby with the bathwater. That when, you know, it's by not recognizing that is, you know, if I go into a work situation and just say, I'm just going to give everything that I've got and I'll just accept whatever anybody wants to pay me, you know, you might end up not succeeding very well in the work market or being able to feed your family. You might, but my guess is there's an incentive, you know, to sort of work the way that other people have worked, you know, in order to get ahead. And to convince one person to do it differently might be a bit of a challenge, and you might not get where you desire. And it's, you know, it's not the old way of thinking still is relevant and potent. And, you know, just to sort of say that we should toss it because of this one small area where it doesn't work, it might help to recognize that it does seem to be effective in a lot of places, but not in this one small area, and just need to be aware of that.
You know, the biologists have come up with a very interesting tongue twister. It goes as follows. Ontology recapitulates phylogeny. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And what does that tongue twister really mean? It simply says that the course of development follows a series. It starts with the simple development, and then we develop according to, as things become more complex, to our phylogeny as we go up to higher species. So it really says that is a both and, you see. We still think, we hear in terms of either or, but we're trying to get, we keep falling back to this either, your way of looking, it's either or this. It is both. We're saying it is both.
Mm-hmm.
And we have egotistical love, we have parental love, we have tribal love, but as we become more powerful, as we develop the ability to create weapons that are so destructive that we can no longer learn the way we've been learning for 3.5 billion years by making mistakes and then correcting them, we cannot afford to make the mistake of pushing a button that unleashes thousands of nuclear weapons at one time. And that's the whole idea that Einstein's message to us is, if we create words that allow us new words in our language, such as we've been doing here, the 7 word switches and so on, and our Barbara's word switch, supersects and synergistic democracy, And if we create new words, we're enabled to solve problems in our mind using our imagination. That's why Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is power, but imagination is wisdom. Imagination is the source of our finding solutions in our mind when there is no consequences when we make a mistake. And we can make hundreds of mistakes before we decide to take physical action that becomes more in line with the laws of the universe, or so-called the laws of the first cause, or the laws of orderliness and predictability.
I had a flash of an image in my head, Abby, as you were talking about, not throwing out the whole thing. I kind of pictured a toddler who's driving a car, and next to the toddler in the passenger seat in the front is the parent, and the parent's hands are tied and is belted, and the parent can't do anything to control the car other than talk to the toddler who's driving. And if that's kind of the situation we're in, that we're this thing that we think we have wisdom, and we're trying to impart it on this toddler who has his hands on the controls of the car and his fate and our fate. What method do we pick to try to influence the toddler to not kill us both? It certainly wouldn't be telling the toddler what's right and wrong, or threatening to scold the toddler or to spank him or punish him. It's just a situation where we're called to treat the toddler and maybe treat ourselves, our old brain, in a way that leads to a particular the outcome that we want. But it may not be by imparting wisdom. It may be talking in toddler language instead of grown-up language. That was one image. The other thing, kind of image I had, talking about power, and I don't know a lot of time to talk about this. I heard someone interviewed on NPR who tried to avoid the Gulf War by bombarding the hotel where a lot of these negotiations are going on by bombarding their fax machines in the hotel. He mobilized a lot of people and friends to try to, influence the decision makers by, through the internet and by using a fax machine. And he was interviewed. They were asking him about power. Why did he think he could do that? And his model kind of, I think, maybe analogous to what we're trying to do, or the Genie seminar, these meetings, that power used to be, you'd accumulate physical strength, you'd accumulate money, or you'd accumulate weapons, and that would give you power until someone had more and they took it away from you. And he talked about the new power in the age of connectivity had to do with power in terms of organizing people, and he thought of it more in terms of current, like electrical current. And the example he gave was the Me Too movement. He said, the Me Too movement was started by two, gay women who were odd, but they managed to mobilize a number of people over time to generate a tremendous current, a tremendous amount of power that unseated many people who were much more powerful than them, in the older currencies of power. But he used that and some others as an example of, you don't have to fight power with the same kind of power. You can fight power with other things. And I thought his analogy of current, and said current changes, you can turn it up and turn it down. But when you find a way to turn up the current, you can topple any power. And he thought the internet was a way of kind of harnessing that, which is kind of what we're talking about. Anyway, those are the two images I had.
The only image I had, I don't know if you guys have seen this meme of Dave Chappelle, and I don't know who read Reddit. If you guys read Reddit, you would see it. And then they would pose a problem, and then they would have the meme with Dave Chappelle, and it says, "Modern problems require modern solutions." And it's really funny when they juxtapose it to whatever the problem is and how someone solved it. So I think this is apropos. The only thing I would say is, going back to the beginning and the target audience, I do think we need to think about who our target audience is, because that's going to require how we actually go out to spread the message. If the audience is a younger audience, there are different ways that you speak, like you're speaking to a toddler. If it's people of a certain age or a certain level of wealth and income and ready, at the point to accept happiness, enough love and peace, you speak differently. So how we go out with the message and who we talk to is gonna, how we talk to them is really going to be shaped by who are we talking to. Because it's not a message. I have to say, I don't think it's a message for everyone. I don't think everyone is ready for the message, and I don't think everyone is gonna. It's gonna resonate. It's not gonna resonate with everyone. So we need to think about that.
Pearl, you haven't had anything to say. You have any last words before we ending the meeting?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Al, you're muted.
I did hear you for a minute, but then now we don't hear you anymore.
Pearl, you appear to have muted yourself. There you go.
Okay. The only thing that occurs to me that there are many ways of, that could work, many things, many approaches. But unfortunately, not everyone gives forth their best effort. And when Josephine says, the message is not going to apply or appeal to everyone, I think there are many people who look for the easy way out, or look what they can derive from something that is growing or existing that they can have an easy ride on. The assumption that we make, I think, is that we're all putting forth our best effort. We're working our hardest to make this a reality. And I think that not everyone has that drive, that expectation of getting in there and putting forth both their effort and their energy. Because if that were true, any of these things or many of these things would work. So that's my thought in terms of there's more than one way to do things, but I don't know that anything will work without everyone's effort and energies being put forth to that goal. So that's why I'm thinking of what Josephine said is very important in terms of we have to approach a younger audience, an audience with different expectations, and not everyone in that audience is going to agree that this is the way to go. I think the methodology is very important, and coming to a conclusion about this is what I keep thinking about over and over again in my mind. Thank you. That's what I was thinking about.
Anyone else have any comments? Okay, well, there's a lot of things to think about here. One of the purposes of these meetings is to stimulate some creative thought. The first word switch is, if you recall, is I think I can, rather than I can't, rather than I think I cannot. Our animal brain is telling us, and another one of our words is the should word. Our animal brain is telling us what we should be thinking. And when we say I could, it's inviting us to use our I think I can to turn on our thinking energy. Our animal brain is telling us we have to do it the way we've done it in the past because it worked in the past. And now we have this idea that maybe if the world is different, then we need to be able to adapt to the new world. And we're not dealing with sticks and stones anymore and fists and teeth. We're dealing with multiple tribes having the ability to destroy everything. So it's time that we come up with a new creative way of doing things. And what better way than where people who already have some intelligence and training and education can come together like we do here and share our genius, share our brilliance, our ideas. But this isn't happening in most places. Now, this is a very unusual form of education where people come together like this on a regular basis and share their ideas. And we've been given this marvelous opportunity through a connection that Josephine made. We've been granted a sponsorship from Zoom to replicate these kinds of meetings. We've been given 50 licenses. One of the questions is, to what degree do we have, any of us have the ability to want to participate? Does anyone here feel they would be interested in starting a Zoom group? Then I see Katie is raising her hand. Is there anyone who would be interested in encouraging someone else that would be interested in starting a Zoom group? It's not always that ourselves, but who do we know that might be interested? And who is capable of running a Zoom group? And you may have different ideas, but my perspective was, or my perspective is that if Brad has created the answers, has created the ways that we can provide people the recordings, and he's made 28 recordings now, and we can certainly are making more and more. But if we can provide people the first wisdom, the word changes, or the important things that get people thinking, all that an individual to run a group has to do is be able to manage the group to see that it's constructive and that certain simple rules are followed, like encouraging people to share their wisdom for several minutes or a period of time and passing the stick around, and not getting into therapy situation. We're not trying to cure people's neuroses in these groups. We're trying to share our ideas and to create genius. So you might think about it, who are the people here who might want to start a group? It can be with friends, with family, but what all it amounts to is, we've already been creating the program. We've given people an example of Genie seminars, and other people who want to lead a seminar can go to watch any of our recordings. They're now going to be made public, and anyone will have have Brad's recordings free, and so it really becomes quite easy to conduct and run a Genie seminar. And I think it was Josephine's suggestion that maybe it's time we have people take turns leading, being the sponsor of the Genie seminar themselves, and getting the experience of how easy it is. And if you don't want to come up with an idea, one of the important ideas in the world that we can discuss, then the ideas are already provided for you anyway. We've already created the new changes in words, simple words that elevate our ability to direct our intentions from our animal brain, from our robotic brain that tells us what worked in the past, to a new creative brain that solves problems and that solves puzzles and grants our wishes, where we develop the freedom to be creative instead of simply following the ideas that others have had. So we're well over our time. We're going to have a short business meeting, I guess, if Brad is still here. I don't see him, and Josephine, so we'll continue to chat. And,
I'm right here.
okay, so we'll continue to chat and wish you all a very good week. We'll see you the next week. So, Katie, we were going to give you, we already just lost Katie there. So we were going to try to call Katie, but I didn't have her phone number when we had our meeting. So, okay, so we have we want to it's hard to proceed without Basu and Sherrod, but I think we do have some issues here to address, such as how can we best use these Zoom meetings to get, so we don't lose them. They say if you snooze, you lose. We want to figure out how do we make these this wonderful opportunity we've been granted. Just the very fact that Zoom is a sponsor, I think, will impress other people who might give us. It gives us credibility. The very fact that Zoom has said they're trusting us with some of their technology so that we can use it to bring people in. So, what thoughts would you all like to share?
Sorry, Don, who are you posing the question to?
Well, mainly Brad and Josephine, part of our.
Brad, are you in your business meeting now, or are we still ending? You're still recording.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then we want to stop the recording. Thank you for reminding me.